The old woman stood trembling at the edge of the parking lot, her hands clasped together as if holding back memories too heavy for a fragile body. In front of her were men most people cross the street to avoid: leather jackets, roaring engines, skull patches, and eyes hardened by decades of judgment. The Hell's Angels had stopped for fuel, their presence drawing fear, whispers, and silent stares from everyone nearby. No one noticed the old woman at first. She was invisible, as people like her often were, until she spoke. Her voice was soft, shaking, but clear enough to cut to the growl of engines and prejudice. She looked at one biker, stared at the tattoo on his arm, and said something no one expected, something that froze the air around them, something that would unravel a story buried under racism, loss, and a mother's grief that had never healed. Before this story continues, take a moment to share, comment, and subscribe to the Channel Black Voice Story, because stories like this deserve to be heard. The town had always been small, quiet, and painfully divided. It was one of those places where history lingered in sidewalks and silence, where progress was spoken about but rarely practiced. People here believed they were polite, law-abiding, and fair, but fairness had boundaries, and those boundaries were drawn long before anyone alive could remember who first drew them. The old woman had lived in this town for over 60 years. She had arrived as a young bride, hopeful and full of dreams, believing that love and hard work could overcome anything. Her husband had worked at the docks, loading freight until his body gave out, while she cleaned houses, raised children, and learned how to make herself smaller in rooms that never felt like they belonged to her. Her daughter was born in that town, raised under the same skies, yet treated as though she was a guest in her own home. From an early age, the girl learned how to read faces, how to measure danger in tone, posture, and silence. She learned which streets were safe and which were not, which teachers believed in her and which expected her to fail before she ever spoke. Despite it all, the girl grew strong. She grew defiant in quiet ways, refusing to let her spirit be flattened. She loved art, music, and symbols, things that told stories without needing permission. When she was old enough, she got a tattoo. It was a rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was remembrance, a symbol of survival, of identity, of refusing to disappear. The tattoo was bold, unmistakable, and controversial. People judged her instantly for it. Employers hesitated. Strangers stared. Police watched her longer than they watched others. In that town, tattoos already made you suspicious. Being a black woman with one made you dangerous in the eyes of people who never bothered to know you. The old woman remembered the night her daughter came home shaking, not from fear, but from anger. Another incident, another humiliation, another reminder that no matter how educated, polite, or careful she was, she would always be seen through a distorted lens. The mother listened, helpless, knowing that love could not shield her child from a system designed to grind her down slowly. Years passed. The daughter moved away. She said she needed air, space, a place where her skin didn't enter a room before she did. The mother stayed behind, rooted by age, finances, and fear of the unknown. They spoke often, then less often, then not at all. The phone call came one winter morning. It was brief, clinical, stripped of humanity. There had been an incident. The daughter had been mistaken for someone else. A traffic stop escalated. Officers claimed they felt threatened. The official report said everything happened quickly. The town accepted it quickly, too. The tattoo was mentioned in the report, not as art, as a warning sign, as proof she was troubled, as justification. The old woman buried her daughter with that symbol etched into her memory forever. Years later, she walked past that gas station every week. She avoided it when bikers gathered there. She had learned long ago that groups like that were not meant to see people like her kindly. Leather jackets, skulls, engines, symbols of power, danger, and freedom she had never been allowed to touch. But that day, something stopped her. A tattoo. The tattoo was unmistakable. The lines, the shape, the meaning. It was the same one her daughter had chosen all those years ago. Seeing it on the arm of a Hell's Angels biker felt unreal, like a crack in reality. Her heart pounded as memories surged. Her daughter laughing nervously while showing off. Her pride mixed with worry. Her fear of how the world would react. The biker was tall, broad-shouldered, his face lined with age and experience. He looked like everything the town warned people about. To others, he was a threat. To her, in that moment, he was a reminder. She didn't approach out of bravery. She approached because grief no longer asked for permission. Years of silence had taught her that fear was pointless when you had already lost everything. As she stepped forward, people watched. Some expected trouble. Others expected humiliation. The bikers noticed her then, an elderly black woman approaching them alone. Tension thickened the air. History weighed heavily on every stare exchanged. She stopped in front of the man with the tattoo and spoke. When she told him her daughter had the same tattoo, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. The biker looked at her differently, not as an intruder, not as an inconvenience, as a human being carrying something heavy. He had gotten the tattoo decades ago, back when he was younger, angrier, and trying to survive his own version of a hostile world. His life hadn't been easy either. Poverty, violence, and judgment had shaped him. He had been labeled dangerous long, before he ever earned it. The tattoo, for him, was about loyalty, pain, and loss. It was about brotherhood forged in places where society threw away people it didn't understand or care to help. He had seen friends die. He had been blamed, harassed, and targeted simply for existing outside the acceptable mold. Yet he had never imagined that the same symbol could connect him to a grieving mother whose daughter had been erased by a system claiming protection. Around them, the other bikers fell quiet. They watched something unfamiliar unfold. Not confrontation, not fear, recognition. The old woman explained, slowly, carefully, how her daughter had worn the tattoo proudly, how people had judged her, how that judgment followed her until the end, how the symbol meant strength to her child, but danger to the authorities who never tried to understand. The biker listened, not interrupting, not defending, just absorbing. He thought of every time police had pulled him over, hands already hovering near weapons, assuming the worst. He thought of the friends he had lost to violence, addiction, and neglect. He thought of how society liked to simplify people into threats instead of stories. The gas station no longer felt like neutral ground. It felt like a crossroads where two worlds collided, not in violence, but in truth. People nearby whispered. Some scoffed. Others grew uncomfortable. This was not the story they preferred. The one where stereotypes broke down instead of being reinforced. The biker removed his jacket, revealing the tattoo fully, respectfully. He explained its meaning, not as a gang mark, but as a scar turned into ink. A reminder where he came from and who he had lost. The old woman nodded. She understood scars. She had lived inside one for years. What unsettled everyone watching was not the interaction itself, but the realization it forced upon them, that symbols they feared carried human stories, that racism thrived not just in hatred, but in ignorance and refusal to listen. The biker learned about the traffic stop, about how quickly assumptions became death, about how reports sanitized reality. His jaw tightened, not with anger toward her, but toward a system that treated people like disposable threats. He had been spared by that system at times. Her daughter had not, and that difference haunted him. The moment that changed everything came when the old woman reached out, her hand hovering uncertainly near the tattoo, as if afraid even touching it might shatter the fragile connection forming between them. The biker nodded slightly. Permission. Her fingers brushed the ink. It was a simple gesture, but it carried decades of grief, injustice, and longing. The parking lot seemed to disappear. There were no engines, no watchers, no labels, just two people standing in the aftermath of lives shaped by judgment. The biker felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame, not for who he was, but for what he hadn't seen, for how easy it was to assume suffering belonged only to certain kinds of people, for how often he had dismissed stories that didn't look like his own. The old woman felt something too. Validation, not justice. Nothing could give her that, but recognition. Someone had finally seen her daughter as more than a statistic, more than a threat. One of the bikers nearby turned away, wiping his eyes quickly, embarrassed by the emotion creeping into his hardened shell. Another stared at the ground, thinking of his own mother, his own mistakes, his own losses. The town's quiet racism had thrived on separation, on never allowing moments like this to happen, on keeping people boxed into narratives that justified fear and control. But this moment refused to stay boxed. The biker promised something, not loudly, not theatrically. He promised to remember her daughter, to speak her name among his brothers, to tell her story when people joked about those kinds of people, to challenge the casual cruelty he had once ignored. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't absolution. But it was responsibility. The old woman exhaled, a breath she'd been holding for years. She knew the world would not change overnight. She knew her daughter would not walk through that parking lot smiling. But she also knew that silence had finally been broken. As she walked away, something followed her. Not fear this time, but respect. The bikers mounted their bikes and left differently than they had arrived. Quieter, heavier, carrying a story they could not unlearn. And the town watched, unsettled by how wrong they had been about everyone involved. In the weeks that followed, the story spread, not as gossip, but as discomfort. People argued about it. Some dismissed it. Others were forced to confront questions they had avoided their entire lives. Why did certain tattoos signal danger on one body, but meaning on another? Why were some people granted complexity, while others were reduced to threats? Why did grief have to fight so hard to be heard? The biker began speaking openly, challenging stereotypes within his own circles. The old woman continued walking past the gas station, no longer invisible, carrying her daughter's memory with a little less weight. The system did not apologize. Reports were not rewritten. But something shifted in human hearts, and that mattered because racism does not survive confrontation. It survives silence. This story was not about bikers or tattoos. It was about how easily society dehumanizes people it refuses to understand, about how injustice hides behind fear, about how listening can dismantle walls violence never could, and about a mother who refused to let her daughter's story disappear. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think, like, share, comment, and subscribe to Black Voice Story. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive, because voices buried by injustice deserve to be heard.